Welcome back to the Daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. Today we are continuing with section 55 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to be doing it outside using the slideshow as mentioned to try to make things as simple as possible. Let's take a look. Okay. So before we look at the details, let's just get a few facts clear. So the reason we make a bracha before we eat is in order to be able to eat, to get permission for that food, by acknowledging that everything that we have comes from Hashem, then we kind of unlock the food so that we're able to actually benefit from it. So it's very important to make a bracha anytime we eat, before we eat. Not only before eating, before other activities as well, but now we're speaking about eating. Now, there isn't just one bracha. There's multiple brachas. Like I've spoken, if you're giving a thank you to somebody and you just say thank you for everything, it won't be nearly as special as if you give more of a special thank you. And the same thing with brachas. The rabbi has made unique brachas for different types of foods. Now, of these different types of foods, what happens when you're eating a number of foods that each require either the same bracha or different brachas? How do you go about it? So let's first talk about if you're eating a few different foods and all of those foods require the same bracha. So the Shulchan Aruch says that you're not going to make the same bracha 5 times. You're only going to make the bracha once. But the food that you use to make that bracha will determine how special that bracha is. So we want to make the bracha on the first choice, on the best option. So let's look at that. Let's look at what's first choice to make the bracha on. So now again, we're talking about when you're sitting down to eat and all the foods that you're eating have the same bracha and you're deciding what to make that bracha on. And it's worth emphasizing that whenever we speak about precedence of brachas, what to make the bracha on, it's all when you're planning on eating it all anyhow and you're just deciding what to eat first or second. But you don't eat something just in order to make the bracha on it. I mean, there's a separate thing when it comes to Shabbos that we make kiddush and we have bread, but that's not just so that you could make a bracha. That's out of the honor of Shabbos. But as far as brachas are concerned, you're never going to eat something to make a bracha. It's the reverse. Since you are going to eat something, it's an opportunity to make a bracha. And when you will be eating multiple foods, then you will want to make a bracha on the food that will make the bracha most special. So what would that be? So the first thing on the list is actually what you prefer most. Whether it's a food that you always prefer, even if now it doesn't make a difference to you, or if usually it doesn't make a difference to you and now you prefer it, or what happens if there's one food that you usually prefer, the other food now you prefer, so then either of the two. But the idea is that when you're going to be making a bracha on the food that you like most, that's going to make the bracha more special. And so if you have a few foods on the table and they all require the same bracha, then pick the food that you like most to make the bracha on it. By the way, there's a similar concept when it comes to Kiddush and Shabbos. If you have a few different wines and you're planning on drinking all of those wines, then you want to make Kiddush on the most honorable of wines because that makes Kiddush more special. So simply over here, you're not making Kiddush, but you are making a bracha. When you do make that bracha, even though all the foods in front of you have the same bracha, and you'll just be making the bracha once and it will cover everything, what are you actually going to hold in your hand when you make the bracha? You'll hold in your hand the food that you like most. That's first preference. That's the what comes first. Now, if you like all the foods equally, or you have no preference, so then, and you have a few foods in front of you, then you should go for the foods of the 7 species of the land of Israel. Okay, so let's make this practical. Let's say you have in front of you both cherries and grapes. Both the bracha on cherries and grapes is Bayer Pri Ha'etz. So according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, if you like cherries more than you like grapes, then you hold the cherry in your hand, you'll make the bracha Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Bayer Pri Ha'etz, And then you'll go ahead and you'll eat the grapes as well. Even though the grapes are from the seven species of the land of Israel, which are very special, first priority is what you like most. However, if you don't have a preference, if you like them both equally, you don't like cherries any more than you like grapes, then specifically take the fruit from the land of Israel, because that's special. It's the fruits that our land was blessed with, and that's what you should use to make the bracha. Okay. There are some authorities that say that you should always make the bracha of the fruits from the land of Israel. But what we're saying here in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is, first choice is what you like most. Second, if you like everything equally, then the next, then what you look at is if there's any fruits from the land of Israel. If there are any fruits from the land of Israel, then you'll use that fruit or vegetable to make the bracha on it. Now, if you're eating different species from the land of Israel, Sfaradim, for example, have a custom that on the 15th of Shvat, which is referred to as a Rosh Hashanah for the trees, they eat all the different species of the land of Israel. So if you're sitting in front of you and you've got some grapes and you've got some figs and you've got some dates and you've got some olives, okay, you don't need to have all of them, even if you just have any of them. But if you have two different fruits from the land of Israel, then whatever's mentioned first in the pasuk takes precedence if you like them all equally. Okay, so if you have on the table in front of you both grapes and olives, if you prefer the grapes, then that's what you'll make the bracha on, if I'm not mistaken. But if you like the grapes and the olives equally, then rather make the bracha on the olives. They both have the same bracha. You'll only be making that bracha once. Why do you make the bracha on the olives? Because they're mentioned first in the verse. They're not mentioned first in the verse actually, but they're mentioned in closest proximity to the word Eretz. Eretz is the land of Israel, and whichever fruit is mentioned in closest proximity to the word Eretz, to the land of Israel, comes first. Okay, so again, first we'll look at preferred food. If they're all equal, we'll look at the 7 species of the land of Israel. And if you're having more than one type of species of the land of Israel, then the fruit that you'll choose to make the bracha on will be whatever is mentioned in closest proximity to the word Eretz, land, in the verse. Eretz chita, Osara, Eretz Otena, V'ribon, Eretz Zayit Shemen Udvash. Yes, Moshe.
To eat 3 zayit, 3 olives, is like eating a pot of lechem. So have a priority in front of a grape that you eat. The zayit has more value.
The reason that the Shulchan Aruch gives that the zayit comes first is because it's mentioned first in the pasuk, or it's mentioned in closer proximity to the word eretz. Because the grape, you have eretz, then chita, usoora, and then geffen. So geffen, which is a grape, is the third word after eretz. But at the end of the pasuk, eretz zayit shemen, the zayit is mentioned in immediate proximity to the word eretz, so therefore we eat the zayit first. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says, coming back from the Gemara. Okay. Now, if you don't have any of the 7 species of the land of Israel present, and you don't have any preference, so then it's more honorable to make the bracha on that which is whole. So if you have a full apricot and you have half an apple, then you'll rather make the bracha on the apricot that's full than the apple that's half, because when you have a full fruit in front of you, it makes it more honorable. Think about if you're entertaining, right? You'll feel the table will be more honorable if the fruits are complete than if they're incomplete. The only concern is that if the apricot is still whole, and then you're going to make the bracha, and you're going to have to break it open and check for insects, and it's going to be a bit of an interruption. So what you could do is you could break it open a little bit beforehand, maybe even inspect it, but leave it all intact. And then that way it's still whole, but you've already pre-opened it. Or if you're eating an apple, what you do is you cut into the apple to cut a slice, but you don't cut it off completely. That way, when you make the bracha on the apple, it's still whole. And at the moment the bracha is finished, you could just snap the piece off because it's already been cut halfway in. Okay, and obviously unsuitable foods won't take precedence. So this is all if you're eating, all the foods that you're eating all require the same bracha. First priority is what you like most. Second priority is the fruits of the land of Israel, and within that, whichever fruit is mentioned first, closest proximity to the word Eretz, land of Israel. And thirdly, when neither of the above two conditions are present, we follow whatever is whole, which generally means that if you are going to be making a bracha on an apple or a nachi or whatever fruit it may be, then you want to keep the fruit whole, just slightly cutting into it, and then make the bracha, and then snap off the piece. That way, that will make the bracha all the more special. Tomorrow, please God, we'll look at if you have different foods with different brachas, which bracha comes first. Thank you so much for joining.